Now on to the important bit. So this talk is the return of Pine Martens, and I'm really pleased to be able to introduce you to my colleague Tracy Hampston. Um, Tracy is an expert in conservation ecology. She's been involved in reintroduction projects before she came to us, which is now, I think, 2 years almost to the day that Tracy joined us. And in the past, she's worked on dormouse local reintroductions, crayfish, and plant reintroductions. Um, she is the project lead for the Two Moors Pine Marten project. I always wish our projects could be shorter titles. But over to you then, Tracy, to talk about the reintroduction of Pine Martens. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Steve. Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. Um, I'm going to do it's quite a brief run through. It's a big project, and yeah, as you'll find out in a minute. So get to have a really good recap of where we've got to so far, but a bit of an inside story, really, of what happens with the reintroduction project, a bit about some of the people that have been involved, the Pine Martens themselves, of course, and also, where we're going next with it. We're still sort of early days in some ways as well. So before I go any further, I do need to mention that this is a partnership project. You can see all our important partners listed down at the bottom there. Um, so two national parks, National Trust, Woodland Trust, Forestry England, and Somerset Wildlife Trust. It's a Devon Wildlife Trust led project. We've also got Vincent Wildlife Trust there as well, who are not specifically partners on the project, but they are sort of expert advisors. They've done a lot of work on Pine Martens over the years, and they're doing a lot of work with us now. So, yeah, so definitely a partnership project and made possible with funds from the Heritage Lottery Fund. So we are sort of in our delivery phase at the moment, which is funded by the National Heritage Lottery. So all thanks to them for doing that. Okay, so I have to always start with what is a pie martin. I'm guessing that probably quite a few of you might be familiar with this. We do start our talks like this, but just in case you're not, it's helpful to remind ourselves what they are, and a few kind of them I think make them really important, and that you can see some adaptations to their way of life as well. So this is the European pine marten. It's a mustelid, so that's the same family as badgers, weasels, ferrets, stoats. Ferrets not being a native species, but they're all it may be more familiar with those. They're about the size of a cat, so they're not a very large animal. The males are a bit larger than females, up to a third larger. So sort of like 60 to 70 centimeters nose to tail. One of the sort of key, I guess, physical features about them is that amazing creamy orangey yellow bib. It can be really quite orange sometimes, and this sort of lovely chocolatey fur. And the bib pattern is something that we spend quite a long time looking at. Quite often, you can identify individuals by the various spots, stripes, and sort of wibbly edges around the edges of the bib. So the word pine marten probably comes from the fact that it's a bit more has a bit more northern distribution than another relative, the beech marten, which you find in mainland Europe. So maybe more associated with some of the native pine forests. But actually, if you look at some of the old English and Gaelic names that we've had for them in the past, they refer to them as marten cats and tree cats and things, and can really kind of see that central picture up there, the sort of agility of them for moving around in the canopy. They're very arboreal, and they're very heavily associated with woodland. So they are a native mammal. They're present in Britain since the last ice age. They live quite solitary. We've got a couple down at the bottom there, so those are kits. And in fact, the only time that pine martens tend to come together is for mating, sort of later on in the summer, July, August time. with kits born the following spring. They're quite slow breeders, not generally till their third year. And their mating in July and August, as I say, will give rise to kits born in the following spring. They have what's called delayed implantation, which is really important actually for us when it comes to the reintroduction, which I'll explain a little bit more about later. So although they've mated and they maybe fertilized embryos, they don't actually implant and start developing until maybe December time, and then the kits are kind of born the following spring. So they're quite slow breeders. They only have one litter of kits a year. So it's quite I think get a good feel for them when you sort of actually see them moving around in the canopy or the understory here. So this is sort of a good example of a good habitat for pine marten. It's a real kind of 3D woodland, lots of understory, complicated and messy, lots of cover, lots of places to hide. And that's really important for predation avoidance. So natural predators for pine marten might be foxes, birds of prey. So in Scotland, which is where I'm talking from at the moment, things like golden eagle will take pine marten as well. They would use old features in woodland like cavities in trees and old big trees for denning, squirrel drays and that kind of thing. So they'll be holing up there and curled up, sort of when they're not out foraging. Um, the last little point really, so it's a nice picture where you can see the bib really well here, but they have quite large territories and home ranges, so that can be very variable between 1 and 10 kilometres square depending on the habitat quality. Obviously, if a pine marten can find everything it needs in quite a small area, it'll have quite a small territory. But in certain parts of Scotland, they have been recorded as having extremely large territories, probably where they're trying to range over large areas. So here you get a nice picture of that bib pattern. So for us, and hopefully for you, we're thinking about conservation of pine martens. So why are we particularly interested in pine martens? I mean, there's an awful lot of species out there in need of effort to conserve them. Um, and it's certainly critically endangered. Ta-da. So in England and Wales, there are very, very few. In Scotland, it's a very much a recovering population. So nearly all the pine martens that actually exist in Britain are up in Scotland. So it's definitely in need of some help in that regard as well. But there are other things about pine martens. It's actually a really key part of our woodland ecology that's been missing now for quite a long time. And one of the really important things about pine martens comes really from how they behave and what they eat, their diet. Um, so this gives them kind of much more impact, perhaps for a small animal as it is. It's not very, very large. But it has much more of a sort of impact on its surroundings, maybe than some other species. There's nothing really that has the same ecological niche, if you're familiar with that term, um, like a pine marten does, where it fits into that woodland ecology. So the kind of things that it likes to eat, may have heard me talk about this before, but it's kind of really important actually. It's kind of shapes how pine marten fits into the woodland. So they are very generalist in terms of what they eat. They eat a whole wide range of things, and you can see up there we've got sort of mammals, birds, fruit, and things. So small mammals such as voles and wood mice form really important component of their diet. Um, so they will feed on those kind of things all year round, and I'd include grey squirrels in that as well. Um, Fruit particularly important at the moment. Obviously, we're sort of coming bit late in the season now, coming to the end of the fruiting time. Um, but really important. And as they have those big, large territories that I mentioned, they are eating berries and then dispersing seed really widely. So it's a function of them in the woodland ecosystem. They will take birds and eggs as well, mainly in the springtime. invertebrates as well. But the key thing is they're taking what's common. They take what's common and what's really abundant. Someone once said to me, they're actually quite lazy. They just go for what they can easily get. And because they're not that choosy, they're not specifically hunting, you know, particular prey items. They'll go for what's abundant. And that's really important when we think about how they can sort of impact their surroundings. So particularly they will have this kind of balancing effect. They're not seeking out rare species, particularly they are looking for some of these common things, and I'll unpick that a little bit more in a minute. Um, so this is a rather wonderful bit of woodland. So we're kind of, as a conservation organisation, we're really keen to not only look at halting biodiversity and preserving what we've got, but it is about bringing back things that we've lost as well. And we look at a lot of our wonderful woodlands, but actually they're missing a lot of components. They're missing many species that used to be part of, the ecology, plants and animals. Um, and we're lucky in Devon that we have some fantastic woodland and we have species like this that live in them. So dormice and pied flycatchers, some of the fruiting trees and shrubs that I mentioned, got some bilberry there, and rowan. But we also have quite a lot of these guys as well. And one of the things that's happened when we've lost predators and things like pine martens, is that these kind of common species, in fact, one could argue that grey squirrels may not even be here if we had had pine martens still in our landscape when they came from North America. But these kind of um, these species that are very common now have been able to really flourish quite often to the detriment of other species within the woodland. So, for example, corvids can really target songbirds. I'm sure you're probably familiar with the kind of damage that grey squirrels can do in our woodland. So, by kind of bringing back pine martens and putting that piece back in the puzzle, they're going to go for probably all of these things, to be fair, but because those common things are the easier to get hold of, they provide a good meal, they're very common, then that's going to be where the pine marten is going to target its efforts. And that can actually have a really beneficial kind of knock-on effect to some of the rarer species. It opens up opportunities for those. And also potentially enables more food to be available to some of those species, and also, as I mentioned, that kind of really important seed dispersal element. And there is the possibility of, if we bring back pine marten, it does open up the door potentially down the line to things like red squirrels to come back. We've certainly seen red squirrels recover in Scotland and Ireland, where pine martens have recovered and pushed back grey squirrels as well. So something to think of down the line, which would be amazing in Devon, wouldn't it? So I'm just going to mention this quite briefly, just really to give you the context of why pine martens aren't here anymore. Um, so there was obviously, we know we've lost a lot of woodland habitat, which affected a lot of woodland species. So that was a big key driver in the beginning. But actually, a lot of very specific targeting and persecution, I guess, of pine martens and many other species actually has caused them to be eradicated from really large parts of our islands. You can see that map on the right hand side there, which is beginning of the 1900s. And that was really the sort of bottom place, the worst sort of case scenario for pine martens. By that point, we'd managed to eradicate them through a combination of hunting for fur, targeting them as pests, really pest control on sporting estates, but also just general eradication of many species in our countryside. But a few things happened that actually helped them recover. Since the 1980s, we've had legal protection through the Wildlife and Countryside Act. There's been some reforestation in Scotland, and also there have been some reintroductions, and some of you might be familiar. There's been some in Scotland, but the more recent ones have been to Wales and the Forest of Dean, and these provide really good stepping stones to help pine martens kind of move back into areas where they wouldn't get to under their own steam. If we were waiting for pine martens to arrive from Scotland in Devon, we'd be waiting for a very, very long time. And that's really kind of one of the key factors of when we look at, do we need to actually actively reintroduce a species as opposed to allowing them to sort of come back on their own. So they've had a bit of a rough time. There's some natural recovery, and it's about providing stepping stones for them to come back. So that brings us to, how on earth do you bring back something that's been gone? And something like a pine marten that's been gone for over 100 years is out of people's living memory, and that can be quite challenging. People have forgotten how to live with pine martens. They're not something they're used to seeing in their landscape. Um, and also, habitats have changed, and things are maybe not quite as they were, maybe better in some ways than when pine martens went. We certainly moved on a long way in terms of wildlife protection since then. So I'm just going to stick a little timeline up just to give you a bit of an idea and a bit of a background to understanding actually how much time we've already spent building this project, way before the sort of lottery funding kicked in, a long time before I came on the project as well. So from the very outset, it was always the way that you manage a really good reintroduction project is you follow the IUCN guidelines. So this is global gold standard guidelines for conservation translocations and other sorts of reintroductions. Um, since we started actually back in before 2018, we now have national guidelines. So we have Scottish and English guidelines as well that are adaptations of those global kind of standards. And it's really important that we kind of remember that. And it's also really important that remember that this is not just about bringing pine martens back to Devon and Somerset, that this is part of a national strategy. So this is part of a much bigger picture. So partnership was formed back in 2018, and we've been through these various initial feasibility and development phases when we've had consultation with stakeholders all the way through this, which is built through that time. And we've had lots of workshops with various sort of stakeholder groups, really just trying to understand how people felt about bringing pine martens back into our landscape, identifying any potential issues, but also how people can support the project and people can get engaged with the project as well. And that's still ongoing now through the whole project actually, and probably beyond. These conversations don't really end. We've got two strands to the project. So we're now, you're probably aware that we've done one of our releases. So obviously that's a big strand in itself and all the work that goes into the reintroduction itself. But we also have a big element that's about engaging with the communities and the stakeholders and, the people basically. Without support from people where we're bringing back species, you know, we're we're doomed to failure. I think this is a global thing. Again, it's very well understood that it's a lot of it's about people. Um, we've had a big kind of lot of consenting that we've had to do around this. So I'm going to run through just this a little bit rapidly because it's a lot of paperwork that we have had to do, but just really to understand that we have had to do an awful lot of jumping through many, many hoops to get to the point where we can actually release a native species back into a place where it used to be very, very common. Um, so initially, before we even start, it's kind of initial feasibility. Is this even possible biologically, ecologically? Are people likely to accept that? And a lot of work was done in those very early stages, which identified some kind of key areas where the habitat is good, it's connected, we've got good woodland cover. These are our Exmoor and Dartmoor patches. You might have seen this map before, and that's kind of our areas of focus. So we had the idea that should we do multiple releases in one area or two? And a lot of population viability analysis was done that suggested that actually two reintroductions would work best in these areas, with the idea that it's one project in two phases and that these populations will come together. And over time, um, establish a population throughout the southwest and eventually, hopefully, link up with some of those other Pine Martens from Wales and the Forest of Dean. So initially, it looked good. We had to do lots of work around potential impact on species and habitats within those areas, and a big buffer zone, which actually equated to most of Devon and a lot of Somerset, actually. So we did what's called an HRA, which is essentially a sort of ecological impact assessment where we looked at the effect on all our protected areas, the species within them, and did full kind of research that has to go into this. We had expert advisors for things like bats that looked at those particularly that fed into that. So that was a really big, rigorous piece of work. All these things have to be sent off to Natural England and statutory bodies, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So we had to do the initial screening and then the HRA, which is quite big. We also had to look at things like disease risk analysis. So if we're moving animals around, are we moving diseases as well, or are there threats to those animals, when they move into a new area? And so we've got a whole protocol that we have to follow around not just the translocation, but afterwards as well. So if we need to retrap pine martens or understand what's happening to them in the landscape, if we do unfortunately find dead ones, making sure that we have post-mortems and understand if there's issues such as poisoning. I mean, they are unfortunately susceptible to things like rodenticides, which people will put out for rats. So these are kind of the documents we had. We also obviously did a lot of stakeholder work, and on the back of that, we also had a social feasibility study done by the University of Exeter, and that's something that will be repeated, so we can look at kind of changes in attitudes throughout the project as well. And information from all that basically got rolled into a huge document, which was our sort of final feasibility study. And these all got submitted to Natural England along with a whole load of other documents as well for our consenting, and also form part of our licensing sort of consent as well. And this all came through the start of this year, so that was really great to get that big chunk of work done and be able to move forward. So there's a couple of things that came out of that. So obviously these are bits of work that really tell us what we should be doing. So some of the risks around some of the species, and we get asked about this quite a lot. People are worried about the effect of bringing back a predator on things like birds and bats. Um, and in fact, the Pine Marten is a native species. All our native, naturally occurring species that we have in Devon co-evolved and have lived and do live alongside Pine Martens in other parts of Europe, and many of them in Scotland as well. So the risk is actually quite low. They're adapted to be able to react to predators in the landscape. A bat roost, for example, has to deal with birds of prey and owls and various other predators. So they have strategies to deal with that. The risks came about really is where you've got kind of these human environments, such as where you've got bat roosts in buildings and birds nesting in boxes. So on the back of that, we have been doing, so this is another piece of work with Vincent Wildlife Trust, doing lots of mitigation work and protecting key bat roosts. A lot of that work has happened now. So we've now got our biggest roosts protected, not just against pine martens actually, but also to stop, domestic cats getting in there and other things as well. So it's a worthwhile piece of work for those other things too. Um, we are looking at various very simple ways of protecting nest boxes that are actually used across Europe and North America as standard, where they haven't got rid of all their predators. So this is just a pretty normal thing to see if you cross the channel. But we wanted to make sure that the impact of changing boxes wasn't going to affect the occupancy, so it wasn't going to affect the way that birds take up those. So we've got our pied fly catcher in the middle there. So we're running a trial um, with a pied fly catcher group, which takes place over the whole duration of the project. We're just waiting to look at the preliminary results that came back this year to just look at and make sure that the birds are happy to still use those boxes with modifications that just prevent a pine marten arm getting in the front, and as I say, also other predators as well. Um, so we've done, I should mention that we have had a huge amount of learning from other Pine Marten projects. And as part of all of this, sharing the knowledge that that we're gaining, but also learning from other people, we set up a sort of UK Pine Marten project group. There are some other projects sort of in the northern counties where pine martens are managing to come back over the border. So it's about kind of assisting their recolonisation there. So on the back of some of that, we are doing lots and lots of monitoring. We have a huge monitoring plan. So this is checking those boxes. So this was part of that trial. We're also doing things like nightjar surveys, which is sort of looking at whether we see any population changes in nightjar, which is a ground nesting bird in sort of areas where the pine martens are being released. Um, and we're also getting baseline data on grey squirrel populations. So I'm sure many of you are aware that one of the impacts that pine martens potentially can have is on grey squirrel populations. And foresters particularly are quite interested in this because of the damage that squirrels cause to woodland, but also the sort of stripping of seeds and nuts and things that mean that they're not available for other species. So they do have quite a big ecological impact, squirrels. How how much of an impact the pine martens will have is remains to be seen, which is why we're kind of collecting data. So as well as the sort of ecological side of things, we were really, really interested in what people thought and also developing, the whole community side of the project moving forward. So we did lots of surveys, lots of talking to people, just really finding out actually what made them excited about pine martens. We found that younger people were really excited about the prospect of bringing back species. I think in a time of sort of biodiversity and climate crisis, having something that's actually tangible and really positive is actually a very powerful thing, I think, for people who are, exposed to a lot of negative kind of tales really around this whole subject. So younger audiences were really, really supportive, but we found that we had a lot of public support for the idea of bringing back these species. Um, we have, I should mention our team maybe at this point has got one of our field officers there, but we have two field officers and two engagement officers, and they have been out this year. So this year we've really ramped up on this side of things because we've had the lottery funding, so we've been able to take on more staff, really getting out and talking to people, and working with people to find out how they might like to be engaged. And we've got lots of things. I'd probably urge you to maybe go and look at the website. Actually, I've got the address at the end to see what activities and what things there are to be involved with. Okay, so the other side of this is that there are areas where we know that there are concerns. So we know that a lot of people don't really understand the role of predation in many of our ecosystems, and woodlands is not really any different. Um, So understanding that there is a kind of balancing effect of having predators, and actually the more predators you have, the more stable those ecosystems are. It's about diversity, um, and kind of that, as I say, that kind of balancing um, of predators, prey, and between predators as well. But they will, unfortunately, there are some impacts that we know that they potentially can have. It's not massively common. We're sort of learning again from where obviously there are pine martens in Scotland and where we've brought them back in Wales and things as well. So things like poultry and game birds can be at risk. So a lot of the work that we're doing is actually talking to poultry farmers, talking to landowners that might have backyard poultry. Here we had a meeting with Basque, who are British Association of Shooting and Conservation, to talk about how we can kind of get in touch best with their community and really work with them to make sure that they know we're there to support them and that there are ways that we can protect things like game bird pens and things. And generally speaking, we have other predators, and if you're taking your predator proofing seriously, you're a good way there to prevent the pine martens coming through. As I mentioned, that pine martens have huge territories, so the density in the landscape is really, really low. So the chances are quite low. But nonetheless, if you happen to be that person, obviously, um, we want to try and get out to as many people as possible, which is quite difficult. There's a lot of people out there, only a small number of us, but we've done a lot of legwork, and as I say, continue to do so. So this moves on to kind of the next step, really. So we've talked to lots of people, we've done all our paperwork, so everything is looking good. But we have to think about, well, where are the pine martens going to come from? So a lot of that early work, looking at the feasibility, identified Scotland as the place where pine martens are most ecologically, genetically, and behaviourally well adapted to being reintroduced into other parts of Britain. There are potential of bringing them in from mainland Europe and things, but that does open up a whole range of problems in terms of moving animals across the channel, in terms of animal welfare, but also disease risk and other things. So Scotland, even though it's a recovering population, there are areas that have had really good numbers of pine martens for quite a long time. And we went back to one of those. So this was a Devon Wildlife Trust and Vincent Wildlife Trust team. We went and did some surveys um, up in Argyll in the spring this year to get an idea of population size and to make sure that if we're taking animals from an area, we're not going to negatively impact what is still a recovering population. So all these surveys generated the data and reports that we also needed in order to get licenses to be able to trap in Scotland. So I would mention as well, which I neglected to mention earlier, they're critically endangered in England and Wales. They are a protected species, so it is actually illegal to trap them, disturb their dens, kill them, and a whole range of other things that go with protected species without licenses. So in order to trap them, we need to have licenses from Nature Scot, and to bring them down here and to be able to retrap if we ever need to. We needed Natural England licenses as well. So all this feeds into that. So this is us doing some lovely scat surveys and some hair samples there. So we walked quite a lot of kilometres along woodland tracks, looking for pine marten poo, which I think as a biologist, it kind of seems to go with the territory, really. Um, and we found lots of pine marten poo, and indeed there were many pine martens. So we were then all full steam ahead. And then really the real hard work sort of began. We had planned for a translocation, so to bring the animals down. All the licenses and paperwork were in place. So this was planned for September. We've just been through. But in order to get them down, we had a whole lot of work to do. And one of the things was building release pens. So I'll just see if that works. High speed building. It took a lot longer than this, to be fair. It was not a few seconds work. So the timber was all milled locally. So this is a Woodland Trust yard who are partners in the project. So it was sourced locally at, in fact, one of the sites, where potentially we were putting pens in as well. So we built them in flat pack panels and then took them out to the woods, and then built these quite amazing, quite large pens, which was where the animals were going to be spending sort of 3 days when they first arrive. And you can just about see there's a den box there, and we put feeding tables and things in them. We also put cameras in there to monitor them for sort of welfare purposes as well. And just this piece of work, I say just this piece of work, that was 10 pens. Um, we accrued over 500 volunteer hours. It was really quite phenomenal. We had all the partners out helping. We had volunteers there that we couldn't tell them to go home. They just kept turning up and wanting to build more pens and get out in the woods and put them up. So these happy volunteers there with a completed pen. And that was the part of it. Then we had to furnish it. So in order to make it a good place for Pine Martens, they needed lots of runways and places to hide and places to shelter as well if it was sort of rainy and or hot and sunny. So it's quite a job getting these all these pens in place in our sort of carefully selected release areas. So what happened next? Well, the next bit was then bringing them down. So we had our pens ready. That sort of rough area of Scotland on the left there, where we were bringing them down. Um, and we had specially adapted vehicles to move them. So this was another really intense piece of work. So the whole project so far, it felt like it had led to this kind of manic 3 weeks for us. It was twice that length of time for the Vincent Wildlife Trust guys who were doing the work all up in Scotland. So they had been there since August, working out, where the best place was to carefully kind of capture animals for release, and looking at, where that might happen. So that took them a few weeks to get that all set up. And then this kind of really intense and hugely responsible part of the project started. So it was a lot of pressure for the people involved. Luckily, we have a brilliant team of people. We had some really great sort of expert advice as well, and expert sort of help in kind of planning and executing this. So we went back to a lot of those things like the disease risk assessment we had to operate within protocols for that. The trapping is very controlled. It's all done with animal welfare being absolutely at the centre of this. Lots of logistics with lots of teams of people. So basically, we had 2 trips a week for 3 weeks where we had different teams of people driving up and down to Scotland um, to bring back animals. So the animals are trapped on site. They're then really carefully assessed to make sure they're suitable. We wanted young animals, but not too young, healthy, obviously. So they were all thoroughly health checked by a wildlife vet. Then they had their radio collars put on, and they also have microchips as well. So that's part of our monitoring work, is to be able to track them, which I'll talk about in a minute. So quite a lot of work just making sure that we've got best animals, that are really healthy and really up to making quite a long journey down to Devon. So that journey took place overnight. We had sort of 3-hour welfare checks for the Pine Martens, which consisted of making sure they were bright and alert. And you can see one of our field officers there checking one of the Pine Martens in a travel pet carrier to make sure they were all perky, feeding blueberries to them and making sure they had water. And then, yeah, as I say, coming back and arriving in the really, really early morning, where you can see the picture of the headlights sort of arriving. It was generally dark, so sort of 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. Absolute silence, no talking in the vehicle coming back. which is quite difficult for some of us who like to chatter quite a lot. But absolutely calm, silent, and then really calm when we got to the other end. And then they were really quickly moved into the release pens, and we just let them open the door and let them get on with it. So then we shut the pen door, and we got the cameras in there and left them to it until sort of a bit later on in the day. So we obviously fed them while they were in the pens, but we had cameras to basically check what they were up to. And we've got loads of really cool footage. So this is one of our males, one of the smaller, slightly smaller ones. There you can see he's got his radio collar on there, having a great little explore around his pen. You can see the den box in the back, and we had feeding tables, mainly so we could monitor actually how much food that they were taking and have it visible to the camera so that we could see that they were actually eating. See, tucking into some peanuts and various other goodies. So we also picked blackberries and other things for them. And then after 3 days, we opened the door. And this is first steps of one of the little females, just as she'd left her pen off to explore a Devon woodland, which was like very exciting. So we had feeding teams for all our pens. We had driving teams, and as soon as the animals went out, we were radio tracking as well. So we have had tracking teams pretty much on the go, almost 7 days a week since the first animals went out. And obviously, then we had subsequent more and more animals that went out. So in the end, we had 15 animals that came down over those 3 weeks, slightly more females than males, which is a good combination. And this is just, yeah, techie picture. So we've been wandering around to the countryside um, with radio tracking equipment, basically looking for really high spots where we can get really good coverage. So this was a really high spot that Ed stood on there, looking pretty much over across the whole of the South Hams there to see if we can pick up a bleep, and then we'd be triangulating. So we'd then go somewhere else, and if we could pick the same animal up, we can get an idea of location. We had GPS data on some of the larger males. They needed to be a little bit bigger to be able to carry the GPS collars and the batteries and things. So the collars will stay on for sort of 6 to 9 months. So we'll be tracking them well into next year and hopefully into the summer as well, which will be really interesting. We're now nearly, well, end of October now. So we expect, going from what's happened with the other projects, that by sort of end of November, these animals will be settling down and finding territories. So they've moved quite a long way. So we released them, in the river valleys, so on the sort of southeast of Dartmoor, and they've pretty much spread right across that whole area. They've really dispersed quite widely, as we kind of expected them to do. And some of them are starting to slow down, and we're getting some ideas a little bit more now about where they may kind of stay for a while. It's kind of a little bit early days yet, so we're sort of we're not really talking too much about exact locations because they're still quite, mobile. But nonetheless, I can say that they are. We have pine martens in our river valleys in Devon now, and some of them within the national park, most of them within the national park, which is just quite amazing, actually. It's just incredible to think that, for some people, they're just up the road and they could have a chance of actually catching a glimpse um, of pine martens. In fact, and I've had a couple of sightings already come back of people seeing animals with collars, which is really cool. So we've had amazing volunteer effort again and partner effort with the radio tracking. So we're now up to over 1,100 volunteer hours. So this is just in the last sort of 3 months, which is just phenomenal. People are so excited and so engaged with it. It's just been one of the really lovely parts of the project that I've really enjoyed, actually. So, as I mentioned, the collars will come off. So, we need to be thinking about other ways how we might follow the follow the Pine Martens once they go. So we're working with some students at the University of Exeter at the moment who are trialing some camera trapping methods alongside, see how that compares with our tracking data. And we'll be rolling that out as a sort of big citizen science project into next year, where we hope that lots of people will engage with that and want to put cameras out across that whole area, so we can start trying to pick up some of these martins. So I mentioned right back at the beginning that they have these quite individual bib patterns, which are very cool. So one of the ways that we may try and identify individuals once their collars fall off is to see if we can get pictures of their bibs. And this picture on the top right, can just see the arrow pointing to the tiny camera on the tree there, is a cunning idea that somebody came up with to try and get pine martens basically to stand on their back legs and their hind feet, so that when the camera goes, we'll have a lovely picture of their bibs. This is some sardines, which are very stinky and supposed to attract them in from a long way, that some volunteers are trialing. So we'll wait and see how they get on. But I just put up some shots that were taken from another project in Scotland. Actually, they did lots of the same thing. You can see that same pipe kind of set up with bait on. It looks like a little rogues gallery, really, with all these little pine martens standing up there. And it was really effective, actually, at picking up their big patterns. So one of the things when the animals were first sort of health checked up in Scotland and the collars and things were put on, is we had pictures of all their bib patterns. Um, and one of our field officers, Ali, has just produced this, which I think is really amazing. So she's done a bibliography of all our pine martens that are released. So we've now got a good sort of artist's impression. It was pretty accurate actually of the different patterns, so that if we do get pictures back, we've got a nice little key there really that people can look at and try and identify them. She tells me it's not quite perfect yet, but I think it's pretty good. I think she's going to add some side bib shots as well. So this is the first public viewing of her bibliography, so it's just brilliant. The other way that we are going to be doing some monitoring is through den boxes. So you saw the den box in the pen. So these are den boxes that were built by some volunteers recently to a similar pattern. So this is a sort of upgraded, up-to-date best plan for Pine Marten den boxes. They're quite large things, large and heavy, so they get put up in hefty trees. We're using them as a sort of double thing, really. It's primarily to improve habitat for pine martens. So we've probably got some really great kind of scrub habitat, maybe some coniferous woodland, and maybe some areas of young woodland where the trees are quite small, which has lots of food, perhaps, and shelter for pine martens, but not really much in the way of denning opportunities. So there's none of those old trees with cavities that they love to use to den in. So putting up den boxes enables them to utilize some of those kind of other areas which may have been a bit limiting for them, perhaps. So we're talking to a lot of landowners about where we might put them. We're being quite informed by our tracking. So obviously we want to put them where the pine martens are likely to use them. And we also want to put them where they're going to sort of add that element to the habitat, that extra added value. But as I mentioned a minute ago, it's another monitoring tool. So we've got a thermal imaging camera now, so we can actually look through into a den box and look for like heat signatures inside, see if pine martens are using them. As I mentioned, because they're protected species, it is illegal to disturb them in the den boxes. So this is a way that we can do this without disturbing them, which we would want to do anyway. But also it means that we don't have to worry so much about licensing. Although I have to say that we are all now fully licensed by Natural England to carry out all these things. Um, so yeah, really good monitoring tool. So once we've got all the den boxes up, around Dartmoor and then Exmoor. Um, they will hope that they're going to be part of a sort of wider den box monitoring scheme that Prince and Wildlife Trust are trying to set up. A bit like if you're familiar with the dormouse monitoring scheme, except there'll be a lot more dormice than there are pine martens. So part of the monitoring is really useful for that. Also, we're working with sort of foresters and other sort of woodland managers really as well, so that if they're quite keen to put up den boxes, we can work with them to find suitable places that fit in with their operation schedule. So obviously you don't want to put them where you're going to be doing clear fells, and also it sort of helps, I guess, keep the pine martens in areas of the woodland where the operations are going to be limited. So you can be quite strategic about how we do that. And we've got a couple of sort of landowners with forestry areas that we're discussing that kind of thing with at the moment. So more on that to come. So we'll be putting up more of those, developing the same thing across Exmoor as well. I haven't really mentioned too much about Exmoor. So the Dartmoor release obviously has been filling our heads for the last month, and it's been amazingly exciting. And it's just really brilliant to know that we are going to be able to do this all over again next year. So I'm going to sort of just do a little whistle stop of where we look forward from this point onwards. So we've been very focused on the translocation at the moment, but we've actually got huge amounts of other stuff going on in the project. I mentioned we've got engagement officers. We also have a youth pathway officer as well as our two field officers that are all project funded. And they're going to be out there doing a whole bunch of stuff with all sorts of different groups of people. So we've got traineeships coming out of our youth pathways, where young people can come and do 12-month traineeships alongside some of the project staff. We've got loads of workshops, activities within the communities and with schools. There's lots of volunteering opportunities. So if any of you are interested, we've got lots of monitoring and also some practical stuff. We're setting up working groups where we can have the best kind of woodland advice for some of the landowners out there, and opportunities for kind of doing woodland creation and restoration work as well. We've got storytelling, filmmaking, just a whole bunch of stuff. And we're even linking up some of our local communities within Exmoor and Dartmoor with some of the communities in Scotland and potentially in Wales, so they can kind of learn a little bit more about what it's like to live with pine martens. And judging by lots of the videos I see on Facebook, there's a lot of people in Scotland who really enjoy their pine martens, playing in their gardens and doing and doing all sorts of crazy things. So hopefully we'll be seeing things like that coming up down in the southwest. So all this is all happening, and then of course one of the other big focuses coming up is that we have our second release, which is due to be this time next year on Exmoor. So we're all really excited about that, taking lots of learning from what we've done this year. Exmoor's a bit different from Dartmoor, so it'd be interesting to see what the pine martens do there, whether that is similar to how they've behaved down in Dartmoor. Um, but yeah, so it's all steam ahead still, and very exciting stuff. And I'm sure I have missed lots of bits out. I think with 45, 50 minutes, it's hard to cram everything in, and there's always so much to talk about. So on that note, I'm going to finish, and you lot can give me some questions for all those bits that I have managed to forget. So
Can't catch the camera.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can come back to a strange fuzzy picture of us.
That's the best way to see
Any
me.
questions?
Tracy, thanks very much. That was a really fascinating tour. I had a very small part to play in this whole thing. I did one of the journeys to Scotland to bring back pine martens, and I have to say, it was one of the thrills of a career, really, an amazing thing to be involved in, and the amount of organisation and volunteer effort and also collaborative effort between organizations. It
Yeah.
was, I think it was really, a testimony to yeah, the importance of having this animal back in our landscape. Anyway, we have got some questions. So we'll spend about 10 minutes on that, and I'll ask the questions that have come up on the screen, Tracy, and then if you answer them as briefly and to the point as you can be. So one of the questions that came in was 15 animals, only 15 animals. This person says a population which is isolated perhaps from other populations of pine martens. So is that a viable number to
Okay.
begin the restoration of the species across the southwest?
That's a really good question, actually, and really, really pertinent, I think, to any reintroduction. There is a big element of a numbers game with it. So our target actually for the whole Southwest is to have 30 to 40 animals. So we got sort of 15 to 20 was the target for the Dartmoor, with the same for Exmoor. One of those early bits of work, and also taken from a lot of other research as well that's happened prior to our project and on other reintroductions, was to look at doing intensive population viability analysis. And what that really means, it's basically you model what happens to a population under all sorts of different scenarios. And we use what we know about pine marten ecology, how they breed, their survival, the sort of, we may unfortunately have to expect some mortality. It would be unrealistic to imagine that all these animals will survive, although we obviously desperately hope that they do. But that all has to be modelled in. And then that's projected forward over 10, 20, 30 years to actually look at how that population will change over that time. And it's for a small kind of carnivore, it's a quite a standard kind of target actually. So it's potentially similar to other projects in other parts of the world where we've done similar things. Um, so that there's quite a lot of research that goes into working out what your kind of numbers are. You know, we will be informed by our project, so we'll be looking at things like mortality to see whether that changes our targets for next year potentially. We don't think it probably will do because we're learning a lot from the two previous reintroductions that have happened in the Forest of Dean and the Welsh project as well. So kind of we can really see what happened with those projects over time. And learning from the sort of expertise of the people involved. So we're pretty confident that that's right, but obviously it's an adaptive process. You know, we monitor and we learn, and then we adapt as we move forward. So in answer to your question, yes, it is enough, but yeah, it's a learning process.
Okay, Tracy, thanks for that. So, related to that question, then, a couple of other people have asked similar sort of questions, but about when will breeding on Dartmoor begin, and what kind of numbers will you reach, do you think, across the region in time? Is that
Okay, that's quite a difficult one to predict, really. So, if you remember back at the beginning of the talk, I mentioned they have that feature of delayed implantation. So, by choosing kind of adult females and males as well, but particularly the females of breeding age, the chances that they may well have mated, there are chances that they may well have mated this summer just gone before, while they were sitting in Scotland, so before we bring them down. The sort of beauty of it in terms of timing for the reintroduction, which was planned like this, is that they're not actually pregnant, if you like. So they just have fertilized little embryos. So they're able to cope with the stress of a translocation and moving them and then finding new homes before the actual embryos then will implant. So it's a bit of a strategy that a number of animals have. So if they have a good winter and manage to survive the winter well, then reproduction will happen. But it's a bit of a strategy if it's lean times and things, they may not produce as many animals. So we hopefully will know. So the kits, if there are kits going to be born, they may well be born next sort of March time. We won't know until they come out. So we might be looking later in the spring to kind of May or maybe even June time if we manage to capture any of that on camera. It'd be amazing if they use some of the den boxes, which gives us really good opportunities to be able to monitor that. Um, how many we're just not going to know. Again, looking at the previous projects, they both of those other reintroduction projects had evidence of kits being born. You're never going to know how many of the females had kits. You're only going to know whether you're seeing some kits. So it's quite hard to predict how many we're going to have next year. In fact, it's impossible. As part of those projections, though, back along, there was, and looking at the amount of habitat that we have in the southwest, I think it was predicted that Devon has enough space for something like 150 animals, which is very, very few when you think about the area that they may spread out over, and that will be quite a long time down the line. Again, it's very difficult to put precise numbers on that, but and the difficulty with any reintroduction is you never know when you've succeeded, for a very long time. It'd be 10, 20 years really to know how successful it's been. We can only go sort of, again, as I say, looking at other projects which
Uh,
have been really successful. I think I saw something pop up to ask about that. So
yeah. So just
those are
to
those
address that, do you
projects.
know the
Yeah.
numbers on where the Forest of Dean and the Mid Wales populations have got to now?
Now, again, it's pretty impossible to get ideas of population numbers. They're very elusive and hard to spot. The monitoring really it tells us two things really. I guess there are two things that we hopefully will be able to get out of this, whether they're breeding. So if we can pick up that breeding has happened, so evidence of kits, that's a big plus. And also dispersal. So we might be looking at kind of how far they've moved, and particularly down the line, if we've got youngsters, are we seeing kind of dispersal out over sort of the southwest area? And again, quite how quick that will happen will depend a little bit on how many kits they have, the quality of the habitat in different places, and which kind of dispersal routes that they choose to take. So those are the kind of two things. To actually get ideas of population numbers is virtually impossible. I'm afraid it just really is. They're just so hard to spot. Um, yeah,
Okay, thanks. So, all right. So let's move the question on. There's two areas I think that the questions have been grouped around. One is on impact on other wildlife,
yeah,
and then impacts on people and how people have reacted. So let's take the wildlife first. So someone asked about are there any studies being done on impacts on dormice, and particularly looking at dormice nest boxes and predation on those? And are
yeah.
there any mitigation measures you can take to help protect dormice against pine marten
Yeah,
predation?
absolutely. And to be fair, I should have mentioned dormice as well. It was just probably me skimming over that bit a little bit. So we have, so back when we were doing some of the stakeholder workshops, we actually invited a load of dormouse monitors to come and talk to us about, how they felt about it. And some of those people were pretty expert, actually, kind of on the more sort of research side of things. And again, the general feeling was and came from people with a lot of expertise in dormouse ecology. Dormice co-evolve with pine martens, so they live alongside them in mainland Europe. The only time from all the studies that we looked at right across Europe where dormice come up in the diet of a pine marten, because they will eat a dormouse if they find one for sure, is when you've got a lot of dormice. So actually, if you did find that, it probably means that your dormice are actually doing really well. However, really good point about the boxes. So that's really important. With the dormouse box, for people who don't know, that the access hole is round the back. So against the trees, the dormouse runs up the tree and into the back of the box, which makes it quite inaccessible actually for a pine marten. It can't reach around and get its paw in. So the key things are making sure you've got good boxes. These are general good things. So if you're part of the monitoring scheme that's run by the PTES, they will give you exactly the same advice. Good quality boxes, well maintained. Make sure your lids are firmly wired down, and your dormice are going to be pretty safe in there. A pine marten is unlikely to expend huge amounts of effort trying to get through into a dormouse box. So
Thank,
yeah, and again, if you've got any concerns on that at all, do get in touch with us. So I did leave our email up on there on the slide actually earlier, but basically it's Pine Martins and then it's at devonwildlifetrust.org. So we can potentially give you some pointers. And if you've got a big box scheme that you want a little bit of help, we might be able to, help out with some volunteers and things if you feel that you need a bit of help getting them wired down properly and that sort of thing.
Okay.
So good question.
One other question about another species. So you mentioned that you were cautious about the impact of pine martens on grey squirrel populations, but will pine martens predate red squirrels? We don't have any red squirrels in Devon,
No, it's not down
but
here.
if we ever were in a position to reintroduce, would they have an impact on that population?
So pine martens will eat a red squirrel, and they do in Scotland and in Ireland, where both of those species live together. But interestingly, as I sort of mentioned, particularly in Ireland, it's quite well researched and documented now that as pine martens have recovered, they have impacted grey squirrels. Bit different ecology in Ireland, so we have to be a bit careful about extrapolating that out across the rest of the UK. But nonetheless, the impact on the greys there has meant that red squirrels have recovered. And I've talked to some of the wildlife trust people in Ireland, so Ulster Wildlife Trust actually, they said it's actually can be really quick. They've had like literally getting pine martens on cameras for the first time in decades, and then literally within a year or not even that long, sometimes they've starting to see red squirrels where again they haven't seen them. So I don't think we'll see that sort of thing quite like that in Devon. It's a different scenario, but it just shows you that whilst the pine marten will eat a red squirrel if it can catch it, um, they co-evolved. Red squirrels have a very well-developed anti-predator sort of responses to pine martens. They respond very readily to the scent of them. They're small, very agile, and very hard to catch, unlike grey squirrels. So I wouldn't be worried. I think it would be an amazing thing if we could ever see red squirrels back down in the southwest again.
So it's an aspiration to see a pine marten chasing a red squirrel in the
It would be really,
southwest.
wouldn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
A bit
That
like I
we'd know
mentioned
we
with the dormice. It's kind of these things are all natural things that should be happening around us, and quite rightly we're very protective of some of these species because we've seen declines. But actually, um, you know, all those interactions, that's what makes sort of a rich ecology and a functioning ecosystem, and that's what should be going on. So yeah, let's hope for red squirrels one day.
So finally, Lynn, let's move on to the people questions then. So we just had a couple of questions. So are you taking any specific measures, or indeed are you very concerned about persecution of pine martens, given that that was one of the reasons that they went extinct, locally extinct in the first place?
Yeah, so obviously that's a key concern. And in fact, we needed to demonstrate that, we have spoken to a lot of the communities that historically might have been involved with that. I have to say, though, these days, some of those threats may well come about more indirectly. So we still got quite a lot of work to do. So where estates potentially are doing pest control, so they might be trapping for other things. If pine martens are in those areas, then they do have to be aware that if they know they've got pine martens there, then they will have to modify the way that they carry those kind of things out. So it's not always purposeful; it can be inadvertent. So we're that's the main role of our two full-time field officers actually is to get round as many people and talk to as many people as possible, identify if there are concerns around, as I say, poultry, whether they're doing one of the things is actually grey squirrel control. So a number of, quite a lot of people will trap grey squirrels with lethal traps. Unfortunately, they catch a lot of other stuff as well, which I don't think people always realise. And certainly, if you've got pine martens there and you know you've got pine martens and you do trap and kill one, you have broken the law. So, it's getting people to understand that that is the new reality, but also that there are better and more holistic ways. And part of that is natural predation as well, with things like pine marten and goshawk returning. And there are other ways of controlling grey squirrels that, are more targeted. So it's a lot of talking to people, a lot of talking through these things. And to be fair, everyone is not the same. We have a whole range of different attitudes and approaches out there, and some people are really on it and taking it into their own hands and are really excited that we've got Pine Martens and say, okay, right, I need to change this, and taking it on sort of on the nose, if you like. So, which is great because they appreciate the fact that they're getting, more wildlife in their woodlands, which ultimately actually is what a lot of people are really interested in. But that's not to say that we don't, have people that are less supportive. So we do a lot of work to work with people that have worries, really.
Tracy, I think that's addressed the final question that we had. So thank you very much. We've talked for 70, well, you've talked for a long time, so you probably need a bit of a rest. So thank you again for giving such a clear explanation of the project and where it's come from, the process that's got us to here, and where it's going to go in the future. Um, Thank you all for tuning in this evening. If you like this evening's talk, we run regular online talks. Our next one, I think, is happening in early November, and it's addressing our projects which are looking at temperate rainforest restoration. So that might be something you want to tune into as well. Have a look at the events page on the Devon Wildlife Trust website. And that's also the place if you want to keep up to date with news about the Pine Marten project. You can sign up for something called Pine Marten Diaries. These are free. They're just an e-newsletter in your inbox that arrive occasionally, and they give you the up-to-date news on where the project's got to, latest events, and volunteer opportunities. So please do sign up for those. And finally, if you like the kind of work the Devon Wildlife Trust does, the kind of work that people like Tracy are doing, we've got lots of other projects right across the county, then do think about joining us. We're a charity that is supporter supported. We need the support of the wider people in the county. So please do think about joining us. Again, the details of that are on the website. So thank you from me.
And thank you
And
for me.
it sounds like the two Ronnies, the people of that generation. And have a good evening. Thank you.